how neurofeedback is beneficial for a person or what change it can bring?
Change is huge. It is actually tapering off while you're reaching in your mid-20s. But by the age of 24, 25, doesn't mean you cannot change it. The idea is the physical growth stops at that particular age. There is diffused theta all across the head. It's usually a sign of attention disorders. So for people,
We can improve our sleep with neurofeedback as well. Hello guys, welcome to the second episode of Brain and Beyond. My name is Sanskar. Today we have CTO of Neuphony, Bhavya. Neuphony is a wearable EEG device. So let's ask some technical questions around Neuphony. So what does that mean? What is an EEG device?
first, the important question is what is actually being measured by EEG. How do we measure it? I'll come to the second part. So our nervous system, particularly the central nervous system, which constitutes of our brainstem and our brain. So this constitutes as our central nervous system, which communicates with each other in electrical impulses. So electrochemical reaction hai. The electrical part is something that we can, if we place a metal over our head, we can record some readings. What we capture at the top of the surface is the electrical impulses from hundreds of thousands of neurons just below that electrode. So if I place an electrode here, I cannot say I'm just capturing this region. I could be capturing a lot of noise from different regions as well. But this is what we say when we get the electrical impulses out, when n number of neurons are firing together and they are communicating and we are trying to tap that signal.
So we have different brain networks as well. So what are these brain networks and how many we are having?
When these different regions are communicating with each other, these synchronize when you're doing a particular task. For example, if I give you an arithmetic task, your central executive network takes over. It is one of the networks that we have seen using fMRI, EEG itself. But the idea is that, for example, the part which understands and comprehends the executive function is in the parietal lobe on the left. But the one which is directing it is in the front. I know we haven't talked about these lobes as well, which will come to obviously in the later half of the segment. But when they are communicating and they are synchronizing with each other, they form a network. That is what is termed as CEN or different networks that we see in these things. The idea with measuring EEG, you can see what we do with compass. So electromagnetic radiations, everything is already there. All you do is there is a pointer which points to your north. Similarly, electrical activity is already in the brain. All EEG does is there is a metal contact which makes sure that it picks up the signal, and then we do some software trickery over it to actually extract something out of it.
Okay, so in the Neuphony app, I have seen that we calculate the different scores out of it using EEG, like focus, stress, relaxation. How we do it?
What frequency bands are. So if you might have also seen there are power bands in the app itself. The idea there is, for example, this is your pendulum, and if it is going like this every second, it goes here and comes back. The number of time it repeats is called the frequency of this pendulum. So if it is doing 1, it is 1 hertz. If it is doing twice within a second, it is 2 hertz. Similarly, when we capture the electrical activity, we divide the electrical spectrum that we capture into different bands. And these bands are very important. And so are the locations that we capture it from. Before I go to the scores, I would like to talk about these two things a little bit first. So, going into first, how does EEG is actually captured? So it is not like you place one sensor and you get some data out of it. To capture one channel or to capture one sensor location, you need 3 wires. One is your ground value, which is your reference. Then there is a active channel, and then there is a reference. So to give you an example, for example, you and me are standing on the ground. So the ground that we are standing at acts as a ground truth for us. Now you are 6'2", I am 5'8". So if I am the reference and you are the active sensor, the difference between us is the electrical activity that we actually capture. So references are usually placed at a location which are electrically less active. For example, your earlobes or the mastoid lobe. The idea here is that we don't want to contaminate the active sensor with the electrical activity because we are trying to subtract. And the reason we do it is we assume that our body is by default grounded. We all carry some amount of static when we sit on chairs or we wear these woolen clothes. So to cancel out what is captured from both of the locations and just capture the actual electrical activity which is generated by the neurons is something that we do for EEG. Now, how do we decide the sensor locations? So for that as well, there are many standards, but the one that we confide to is called 1020 system. So it has around 19 active channels and 2 references. References being again your earlobes or your mastoid bone, the bone that is just behind your ear. Both of them are electrically very neutral, so they don't contribute to the electrical activity at all. Now the 19 active channels that I talked about are divided in the entire head. If you want higher density EEG channels, then there are 1010 systems, there are 10.5 systems, which go up to 64 channels. But here we are more trying to decide how can we do the research on those, but take the benefits out and give it out to the consumer. Where the idea is that can we do something that we learned with 64 channel, can we replicate it in the 6 or 8 channel domain? So as we do with AI and machine learning algorithms, we train with many parameters, but by pruning and hyperparameter tweaking, we identify these are the channels which are important for us, and then we build the protocol that you were talking about. So coming to the sensor locations again, the entire brain, the neocortex, as I said, EEG only measures the cortical activity that is happening at the top. Now that neocortex is divided into 4 lobes. There is frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital. And what does that mean is our brain develops when we are born. It develops from back to the front. So by the age of 24 and 25, we are still developing our brain. So that is the time where the mental development, as we say, physical mental development starts, where prefrontal cortex is entirely developed, and that is the time we will usually find very difficult to change, because at that time, in 12, 13 and pre-teenage and teenage years, the amount of change is huge. It is actually tapering off while you're reaching in your mid-20s. But by the age of 24, 25, you have a fully formed brain. Now, that doesn't mean you cannot change it. The idea is the physical growth stops at that particular age. Now, occipital is something that is used for your visual cortex. So it is divided into 2 lobes. The lower part is what you see is getting electrically reached here. So your eye goes to retina goes to the stem cells, and then they reach the occipital lobe. All of the sensors except the olfactory goes through the this brain stem of ours. So there's a small area called reticular activation, RAC, which keeps us awake. So every time you see something you want to focus on, is something which is passing through RAC. So that reaches our occipital lobe. Then it is being processed. Similarly, auditory are assembled here on near the ears, temporal lobe, where we don't just listen to what is coming in, but you also inhibit. For example, if we are having this conversation in a ground, there are too many conversations happening, there are too many people. But when we lock onto a person, we are able to tune out everything out. That is also something that our brain networks do, that we are trained to do over time. That inhibition control comes from the temporal lobes. Now, the parietal is kind of your sensory mapping. So without even looking, I know my cup is here. I actually looked at it, but in this scenario, the idea is you know where you're sitting, your body is being controlled, the light is over there and everything else. So taking the information from all the senses and creating a map of your world is something that usually parietal lobe does. Then there is frontal, which is divided into prefrontal and frontal, which develops the last. And that is the central executive network, which means it controls everything you do consciously. So if you plan these questions, these are something which your central executive network knew that you were planning to do something like this, even though it used different brain networks to form these questions, or your understanding, or your understanding of EEG to formulate them, and there are different regions, sensory motor cortex, to actually write it down. But it was your prefrontal cortex which decided that you had to do it. So that is where, and it is also very important in emotion control. So that's all about the neocortex that we are actually capturing. Finally, coming to the scores, we have already talked about brain networks, a small hint of it. The 3 brain networks that we majorly focus here are, that's the last topic in terms of information overload before I actually go into the scores. So the 3 networks that are very important specifically that we capture with Neuphony are also central executive network, which by the name CXOs, something which controls the executive activity that we do. Then there is salience network, or SN, so you can also remember it as switching network, which I'll come to why. And then there is default mode network, which we term as DMN. Now the idea is, if you are planning to do something, or if you are engaged into something, it is your CEN which is highly active. Now it doesn't mean your prefrontal cortex is active. It means everything which is involved in that particular task is synchronized in your head. So it doesn't matter if I'm getting high activity in one particular sensor or not. I have to get the same kind of activity at 2 different locations to actually say that I'm actually doing the activity I was given. And then there is DMN. When there is no external stimuli, what do we do? What do you do? For example, if we stop talking and I just leave you for a minute or 2, the default thing would be आज मेरे को घर जाके क्या करना है, जिम कितने बजे पहुंचना है, या किस चीज़ पे काम करना है, anything which is related to you, and that is where DMN comes in. So DMN activity goes up as soon as there is no external stimuli. So it has a benefit, obviously, because that you can also work on yourself. But the negative side of highly being involved in DMN also comes, for example, depression, anxiety. So because our flight and fight response is not something which is trained to distinguish between if the stimuli is actually happening or we are thinking about it. If you want, I can go much deeper into it, but first I want to conclude the scores wala part. So, and salience network is the one which decides where do I have to go. That's it. That's all it does. Hence the switching network I wanted it. So if you are doing a task and you are getting distracted, when you catch that distraction, it's actually the CEN which switches you back to CEN, from DMN to CEN, and that is what we do in a mobile application itself. So when we say it's actually good when you see the graph, it is never good to see 100%. It means you are not challenging. The meditation was not challenging. Try to take it up a notch. But if you see your graph that you are going up and down and you are still able to bring your focus up, that is what is important, and that is what we call as neurofeedback. Where it was challenging enough that you are getting distracted, but you were able to push yourself enough that you always keep bringing your focus up. So for that, for focus, there is a ventral attention network, VA, and dorsal attention network also. So these 2 networks are actually a part of CEN and DMN science itself. These are the sensor locations that we actually focus on. So FZ being the center of the central executive network. We could also have used the orbital sites, but this was where we saw the least amount of artifacts. And then for DMN, we opted for PZ. Now the idea is, with our focus score, we always say that it is an external focus. What external focus is that you are given a stimuli and you have to interact with it. So even if you are focused on a thought, it will always be that you are focused. If I am doing, for example, mindfulness meditation, where you have to go through your entire body, your senses, it is also a kind of focus where you are switching your focus between different activities. But it is internal, it is not something that you are responding to a stimuli. So when we say focus, I just want to limit it that it is that you are attending to the stimuli that we have given. So at FZ, you want to promote higher brainwave activity. And at the PZ, default mode network, we wanted to calm down. Now, calm down in respect of what? And this is where the higher, obviously I know we are going to talk about neurofeedback and other applications as well. And that is where I think I can much better explain how to compare the scores and what to see from the reports that when you're looking at it.
So, using these scores, I have seen students building many different BCI applications as well.
Yeah.
So, one of the applications which I think is very creative was flying a drone, completely controlling a drone.
From GP students.
Yeah. So, can you just explain how our brain is actually doing that without even controlling it manually?
Okay. So, it didn't have anything to do with the results that we showed. In our desktop application as well, or even with any generic EEG device, you'll see there are certain kind of experiments and paradigms which are well researched, well defined, which have been used since 1980s, 90s. Some of them are P300, audio P300, visual P300, SSD EEGs. So the drone thing that you are mentioning was actually an implementation of steady state visual evoked potential. So all they had to do there was, I don't want you to train somebody or think of that I have to go up, or while you're flying the drone, you have to think of up, so it will go up, you have to think of down, it will go down. Obviously that can be done as well using obviously the deep learning algorithms that we have right now. But the more interesting part here is the reason we used SSVEP was we didn't want to train somebody. So irrespective of who is taking that exercise, the drone will fly. And to accomplish that, what we had to do was every action that the drone took, so up, down, left, right, straight and back, all those were actually arrows on the screen and they were all flickering at a different frequency. So do you remember the frequency I was talking about? The top one was going at 20 Hz and the bottom one was going at 10 Hz. So if I'm looking at a particular arrow on our occipital loop, that particular frequency is significantly higher. And that is how we distinguish that we are looking at that particular thing. So there is no camera involved, there is no external stimuli that we have to think or we have to do something. You just have to look at that particular arrow and within a second it will respond and it will capture that and provide the action to it. The application is something that I am more curious about. Where, for example, if you are a pilot, you already have a lot of controls, you are flying over different things. If looking at a particular thing fires, for example, or you are going for disaster management, you want to dislodge the food package that you have, or any number of applications that armed forces and everybody are involved in, you don't have to control everything. If there is a visor, which obviously the pilots have, at the corner, if there is a particular frequency which is blinking, and if you look at it, it will automatically, and if you have EEG sensors obviously in the helmet, which is something that we are trying as well in the prototype. So that will automatically do that particular action. So where, for example, F1 racers comes to an end, because they already have a lot of control. Exactly. So they have to control the sensor, the braking, everything is happening. But they already know the track. They are looking at the map how the track is going to change. If there could be certain controls which could be offloaded, particularly which are critical. So, for example, if one of the sensors go bad, engine sensors, they might
Turn it off by seeing it.
They might turn it off by it, or even they might be informed about it. So visual information is okay, but if it is blinking at a particular frequency, then you don't have to. For example, in red there is a check engine which is going on. If you look at it and you don't have to respond to it, your brain will automatically do the rest. That can be very beneficial in the sense, because if one of the sensors is going bad, the mixture of the tank can be bad and it might blow up the car. So when you talk about critical and overloaded applications, SSVP is a very good place where I think the applications can be good.
So you have any other, like we talked about P300 as well,
Yeah.
which is also a response. So do you have any other response which we can use for building this BCI applications? The students can use
BCI particularly is very interesting if you talk about it, like, as you mentioned, visual P300 or P300 in general. So there are mismatch negativity in terms of responses in 200, P300. So what P300 is, positive peak at 300 milliseconds. So the idea is let's just jump to the application directly rather than thinking of why do we even want to do that. The application, I think, might be a better use case of it. So there is a keyboard if you are a bedridden patient and there is a keyboard in front of you and you're looking at a particular word. So for example, I have to say my name is Bhavya. So if I'm looking at M, there are two lines which are running and they are changing constantly. So there is a horizontal line and there is a vertical line, but you're looking at M. Every time these two lines collide at M, there will be a peak at the occipital lobe. It can also be captured at parietal. So we have actually seen it with our device that at PZ as well, that we were able to capture the P300, but OZ is always a better option to do that. So if you see that particular peak happening, you know that you have to type that particular word. Now, given how much our keyboards have improved, with M you can already start doing predictive text. So if you write my name, could be automatically that you could do. So if you're focusing on none of the words, name will automatically come. Or if you click on press, it will automatically include name. So imagine a communication protocol, and that is something that has already been done, and not now, I think 4 or 5 years ago. But the more interesting part was, this was a communication between a bedridden patient and a doctor or maybe a loved one. Now, last year, there was an experiment where we were able to communicate between two disabled people, and it was called a brain-to-brain interface, not a brain-computer interface, where a person who is bedridden was able to send the thoughts directly to the person who was also bedridden in a different hospital, in a different location. And the application was, again, it was built again on the same thing, P300. But you took that message, you translated it back, and then you showed it to a person who cannot read. So multimodal completely, it was sent through audio, it was sent through visual. So this is something, one of the applications which P300, how it can be used. SSVP is something we already discussed. Audio P300, let's talk about that. So again, I don't want to limit the conversation to completely neurological conditions, because obviously you can use these things in a rehabilitation network as well, or people to help out with even if they want to work on themselves as well, because I can talk about what happens when there is OCD, what happens when there is higher level of anxiety, which has not turned into a particular problem yet. But when you talk about those extremities, it becomes easier to visualize what can be done for the audience which is at a level lower than this. So talking about audio B300, whenever you go to hospital, you might have seen that multimodal capturing device which beeps at a particular frequency. Beep, beep, beep. And it is made like that throughout the world. It doesn't matter wherever you are. The frequency and the beep sound might change, but it is working at a particular frequency and you're able to hear it. So with your eyes closed, even if you're lying down, you don't have to consciously look for it, but your brain is processing that signal. Every time there is a change in that processing, you can actually see something is happening in the brain.
So whenever we listen to that beep.
Yeah. For example, a person who had just been through an accident, if there is a stroke or any other problem which is going on, if we are doing that, while they are on the operating table, we can actually measure if the brain is responding to the stimuli or not. So if you hear it constantly, your brain washes it out. So you don't get that P300 wala peak anywhere. As soon as something happens and that beep changes, so the voice is not changing, but your processing is changing. So the idea is, if something changes, it will change the pattern of that P300 waveform again. So you can be alerted that something is happening with the patient. Again, a very extreme and a very, I would say still a very useful application of it. But I think we can come down to much more everyday use kind of applications as well.
So basically, we now know what we can do with EEG. We can see that whatever the stimulus is, our brain will react according to it. So capturing EEG is how we capture EEG. Like we were discussing about that, there should be a metal plate, and then we do some signal processing as well. So for example, I have to get a good EEG. How will I know that this is a good EEG or this is not a good EEG? Even if I don't know about EEGs and all.
Okay, so one of the most layman
technically.
Yeah, so the easiest test you can do is alpha blocking. So again, I can be, people can come and say it's not actually alpha, but what happens is, when our brain, so how does EEG gets generated is, through our brain stem, the signal gets to thalamus, and from there it goes up to the neocortex and then comes back. So these columns are something which is happening constantly. I mentioned reticular activation. So every time there is a stimuli, you are responding to it, and it is sending different signals along with it. So you don't see a sinusoidal clear pattern in EEG. It is all noisy and a lot of different frequencies are going on there. As soon as you shut your eye, your visual cortex goes idle. Now, visual cortex consume all, it takes almost 30 to 40% of your entire brain activity. So there could be a lot of noises and it will have an effect on alpha rhythm as well. But as soon as you close your eye, you see a clear pattern, sinusoidal pattern in the EEG called alpha rhythm. Now, it still doesn't happen for 8 to 10% of the population, but for 90-92% it happens always. Okay. Just close your eye and you'll see alpha rhythm clearly in the signal. So if you've created a device, the best thing would be place the sensors anywhere, making sure that you have the reference and the ground in the right position. And you, as soon as you close your eye, you'll see between 8 and 12 hertz, there is a clear peak which comes. And that peak is happening because reticular activation is calmed down. And all we are seeing is the communication between the thalamus and the neocortex. So when that dominance comes back, that is something which is important. And that is something which we also train in neurofeedback as well. So if you say that the communication between that alpha rhythm is weaker, that is something that we very commonly train with neurofeedback as well.
So coming to neurofeedback again, how it is beneficial? Like I have seen athletes doing neurofeedback training a lot, and a lot of people also do. So how it is beneficial for a person?
So again, I'll try to break it down a little bit. What neurofeedback is, it got started with a very old experiment. So I think you can summarize it: neurons that fire together wire together. That's I was trying to remember the name of the neurologist or the neuroscientist who said it, but the rough idea is that the more more you train different networks of your brain, we have already talked about CEN, salience network, DMN, task positivity network. So all these networks are already there. But there are base things which are different for everybody. So for you, it might be easier to work in the morning. For me, it is easier to work in the evenings. We have different schedules, we have different lifestyles per se. But if we have same job and we have to synchronize our kind of pattern so we can actually work together. This is where neurofeedback can be a very helpful tool, because all you're trying to do is, this is something I think I need to work on, and that is what you start training on. For example, we discussed about external focus, right? So in external focus, you see that whenever there is a distraction, particularly an external distraction, a loud noise or something, it is very difficult for you to come back. Now that is something that you should start training. And how do you train it? Once you have the activity going, if there is a noise, you go down, first we need to identify what is the reason that you are unable to come up. And then we start working on it. And it's all automated. So I'll try to explain what neurofeedback is. So if you have come to me for the first time, right now I think there is only one way we do neurofeedback, is using QEEG. Now I'm going to set up a cap over your head. I'm going to ask you to do nothing. Just sit, relax, think whatever you want to think, do whatever you want to do. Once you got habitual to the device and the cap, I start a baseline recording. Now that baseline is, I want to see how your brain works. And for the person who is doing it for the first time, always have a habituation period, because you're wearing something new, which you usually don't. So have a 5 to 10 minutes when you're talking to the person, you're explaining it to them, but first set up the cap or the device over their head. In that baseline, just ask them to sit calmly. And that is one of the challenges with EEG, because if you move, the data is kind of bad or unusable. So after 1 minute, 5 minutes, if we get 1 minute of good data, we can actually see how their brain networks communicate when they are not doing anything, they are not shown any stimuli. Now I give you an external focus task. Now I know from this there should be an uptick in particular brain regions. So when we talked about 10-20 system, this location is called F7 and this is F3. So these locations should have a particular response to the external stimuli. If that is lacking, that is something we start training. And for that there are multiple, again, you can use VR for that. We have already tried it. You can use auditory stimuli, haptic feedback. So even with feedback, you can go with positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. So taking away the stimuli which you were liking, and all those kind of things can be programmed. But the idea is that your brain should be informed that you're going off track. So every time you're getting distracted, you're getting a signal. Now, when we are in that loop of getting distracted, the main part is when we realize it's already too long. What we are trying to do is artificially punch you or poke you in the way that please come back, please come back, please come back. And every time you do, that is again you get a positive reward from the system. So, and the more you start doing it, it gets translated into your everyday activities as well. So that's what neurofeedback as a base is. So when we talk about athletes, they want to maybe work on their balance or injury recovery. That is the time they want to see at what particular part they're getting stuck at. Because in every training you do, and including neurofeedback, there is a plateau that you reach. Every time and there has to be a breakthrough for you to get to a new level. That is something where neurofeedback is actually very important. Because is it your spatial memory which is having issue, or episodic memory? All these things are responsible, our brain, different regions of our brain are responsible for these activities. And from those sensor locations, we can actually pick it up. So from that baseline, I can tell you what are the issue points and what is something that you should focus on right now. That is what I think neurofeedback, that's why it's very attractive to specifically athletes.
Because they want to break that plateau and
Yes.
go over it.
Exactly. Or even if they're trying to get back to where they were, they're coming back from an injury. That is always very difficult. But actually, Ria and I think Ria did that experiment. She went to an athlete. He was, I think he was a swimmer, but going through some, I think ACL tear down or something. He was recovering from it. So when we did the baseline, we saw there was some issue with high activity. So he was very distracted and was not able to calmly relax and sit down, because even with eyes closed, there was a lot of activity going around, specifically in the DMN. The second exercise we gave him was visualize the game, visualize what you do just before you go to swimming. They didn't have to do anything. Just sit down with eyes open, eyes closed, your choice. But visualize each and every step. So where do you take a shower? How do you change? What do you think? What kind of music you listen? And till the time you climb up. The entire activity, their focus was 98. Then we gave them a different focus task or a relaxation task. They went back then the baseline again. So the idea here was, it was not that the focus was lacking. It was the external injury which was causing him to be in that particular mood, and it was creating a negative loop. And the minute we said it, it was like, yeah, now it makes sense that I've been in that space, but once you've told it to me, now I know what to do with it. So every time, and I think we have talked to him a couple of times after that as well, all he tells us is, now he has already recovered, but he told particularly Ria that he said that particular exercise, every time I was going for my recovery, even for my physiotherapy, rather than focusing on the therapy, I used to focus or visualize what I am doing when I'm going for that particular game. And that had a huge impact on how faster they recovered. So it's just more about what they were in, what particular mode you can put yourself through using neurofeedback. And we did just one single session with them. It was not a neurofeedback therapy, it was just a baseline activity that we wanted to capture with athletes.
Okay, so people can work on whatever they are having an issue with. For example, if I have an issue maintaining my focus, or if I have an issue maintaining my calmness, so I can work on it with neurofeedback. And
so when you talk about focus, what kind of focus is it? So are you talking about external attention, that I have to attend to this particular stimuli and stay attentive to it, not getting distracted by everything which is around you, right? So that is a different kind of neurofeedback protocol.
Okay.
If you say that it is very difficult for me to focus because internally I get pulled down by thoughts, that is a very different kind of neurofeedback therapy.
Okay.
So you might imagine, because we all have heard about the left side and the right side being very creative and left side being very analytical. Kind of true, kind of a mixed bag, I would say. But for majority of the people, our left side is very active, a little bit more active than the right side, sorry. The reason being, all of us are righties, majority of us. So when we are doing something, we are always like, I'm always moving my right hand, I'm always doing this when I'm sitting calmly. So there's always an activity going on in this side. So when I do EEG, just in my baseline, I see there is a certain amount of imbalance between the left and the right. But when you think of left, it is something that focus on details. So for example, what kind of tab is it? What is something that we were talking about? If you want to talk about memory, do you exactly remember what you did the entire day? So that's your sequential memory. I woke up, I did this, I did that, I ate that, I came to office, I remembering the entire thing. And then there is on the right side, which is episodic memory. So do you remember what happened at that particular day in a gist of it? So looking at things on a higher abstraction level is something that right side is very good at. So the kind of problem that you come with, and obviously with QEEG we have already mapped that from EEG itself, even though if you won't tell us what is the problem, we can make a guess from 4 to 5 different morphology or EEG data that we are looking at. We can actually make a rough guess what is something that you would like to work on.
So it can help me improving my sleep as well. Like a lot of people have problems with
That's
sleep.
a very good question. So one lobe or one particular, it is not a lobe actually, but the region of the brain which I didn't talk about was sensory motor rhythm. So this is in the bridge of parietal and the frontal. So sensory cortex and the motor cortex. By the name you might understand, this is the region where we get all the senses. And when we command my hand, for example, to consciously move or to pick it up, this is all the motor cortex which is happening. So people who are having issues with sleep, it could be because sleep is a function of everything we do. Our diet, our exercise, our routine, our coffee intake, stimulant intake. So I am not saying that if you do everything wrong and do this particular thing, it will improve somehow. There are and there is no use of doing NFB for a person who is drowsy. For example, if you are sleep deprived, no amount of training is going to help you. If you are experiencing issues with your mood and particularly feeling a little down or depressed, a little anxious, and you're not sleeping properly, before going for neurofeedback or thinking of different exercises or different things, the first thing you should look to improve is your sleep. Now to improve that, assuming that whatever you could have done, you have already tried it. One thing which has proved very beneficial for sleep is there's a SMR rhythm which goes in your head when you're idle. By idle I mean you're sitting on the table and you're consciously making a choice not to move anything. And try to train that, try to reward it for 15 to 20 minutes a day, and it has shown to improve our REM sleep and our deep sleep a lot during the nights. So obviously there are things that you can do to improve your sleep as well. For example, for a person who has difficulty switching off from their work, maybe a protocol which rewards theta in the frontal cortex. Theta is a calming down frequency rhythm. So the 5 bands that we talked about, delta, theta, alpha, beta and gamma. So rewarding alpha 1, which is 8 to 10, or theta, which is 4 to 8. If we reward this in the frontal cortex, it will calm yourself down. It is not instantaneous, but and a huge but, you should not do it on your own for the first time. So for example, if you have PTSD, you should never try this because it might bring back certain memories which your brain is trying to block. If you have mild traumatic brain injuries which people are not aware of, for example, something happened in my childhood or something, these can have a effect on your brain itself. So whenever we do neurofeedback, or not we, whenever people do neurofeedback, they always take these kind of feedback from people. Hence, rewarding just theta is never a good option. Rather, do theta by beta ratio. So, if theta is not coming up, can we push down beta itself? So, that kind of balances out the entire thing because that will be easier for you rather than rewarding theta at a particular location. So these kind of workarounds are all created in neurofeedback therapies, which can actually help you turn off where you will find it easier to go to sleep.
Okay, so since now we know about EEG and we know how it can be used for different BCI applications as well.
Yeah.
How neurofeedback is beneficial for a person or what change it can bring. Yeah. Obviously, we mentioned that.
So we have some questions from the audience. What does more of theta and delta band mean? as we can see them pretty high in the band power graph. And we are asking this as delta is prominent in sleep. How in awakened state it's going prominent when we put Neuphony or any headband on?
Okay, so with any wireless headset, you will see high amount of delta. The reason being the amplifier and the battery are being packed into a smaller space. Hence, we never wanted to target the sleep audience at the first part. So delta is something that I'm not going to comment on because I already know there is a huge amount of delta noise from the device itself. So when we talk about delta, if you want to actually see delta rather than filtering from 0.5 Hz to 50 Hz, do a filtering from 2.5 Hz to 50 Hz, where you'll see, even though you're ignoring half of the delta band, but you will actually see what is the actual delta that your brain has produced, not what is an artifact of Neuphony or any wireless EEG device.
And can you also comment on the theta aspect of it?
Theta is something which is commonly high, but it should not be higher than alpha. So if you're getting theta by delta ratio or theta by beta ratio, which is under aroused, over aroused and balanced, these are the three states that we classify theta and beta bands by. So if there is diffused theta all across the head, it's usually a sign of attention disorders. So for people who find it difficult to pay attention or stay focused on, as he was asking, so if you are even attending to a task, it will be very easier for you to get distracted from any stimuli.
And just a feedback from Madhavi, she used Neuphony today for her activity and her relaxation reached 95% from 61%, and she say loves using the headband, and she uses actually for therapy and music therapy, before and after music therapy.
So I would also recommend if you can try during music therapy as well, because for example if you're experimenting with binaural beats, see, because we were talking about SSVEP, right, steady state visual evoked potential, where a screen is flickering at a particular frequency. What happens when we put different frequencies through our ear? How does the temporal lobe behave? Because our brain balances out the frequency, but it pushes that particular 4 Hz again. So rather than the user doing or trying to fix or improve a particular frequency, that could be actually a feedback protocol itself, where you do that as well, and hopefully that helps with your music therapy itself.
Thank you so much. You can continue.
Okay.
So we can improve our sleep, obviously with neurofeedback as well.
As I said, sleep can.
There are multiple factors affecting sleep, that I know.
That's why I never say that you can work on your sleep, obviously, but if you want to say that I want to work on a cognitive profile, I would be much more upcoming when I would say that yeah, I can definitely think of a protocol that we can build. Regarding sleep, there are so many parameters that it becomes difficult for.
So we can work on mood as well, like we were thinking about cognitive profile. So can we work on mood?
That is something that we provide in the desktop application itself, even though it's very granular, positive, negative and neutral, and that was based on a bipolar research that we saw, that the asymmetry between the left and the right lobe, if there is, so neither is good. Left side hyperactivity is also not good, right side hyperactivity is also not good. One constitutes to manic episodes where they're like, I can jump from the 5th floor, nothing is going to happen to me, and the left side activity does that, and the right side is usually very depressed. So what is the level of asymmetry, that is important, but if it is on a smaller scale, that can be used to your benefit, where we can see what is what's your current mood or what's your base state. So because mood is a function of so many things. For example, mood is very highly regulated by stress. So talking about stress, one of the train networks, because we just stuck to the neocortex, but we have much more deeper networks in the brain itself. One which is highly important for stress regulation is called hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, BCA, I guess. Yeah. So what happens here is, as soon as hypothalamus hypothalamus detects there is a stress condition, it releases a neurotransmitter which in turn lets pituitary glands release ACTH, and then our adrenaline, epinephrine and norepinephrine, these three flushes our body. This happens without our brain knowing. So if you thought of an incident, episodic memory, you remembered something or something actually happened in front of you without your central executive network knowing or responding to it, all of this has already happened. Now the problem here is, when adrenaline and all the other neurotransmitters are released in the body, we shut down all the necessary function. So digestion stops, healing stops, tissue regeneration stops, everything stops. Because at that moment, our body is getting prepared to respond. This is the time that the thalamus is also communicating with the prefrontal cortex, trying to understand, is it something that we need to stay on, or was it a false alarm? If it is a false alarm, everything goes back to normal. We resume our activity. And one example that I like, and actually not mine, it was I think by Dr. Terrent when I was doing his workshop, that you have never seen a deer who was just chased by a lion to think that next day he's thinking about that he was chased by a lion, so he cannot eat grass. It's a specific something that we humans do, that if something happened in the past or something that we are worried about in the future, we can torment ourselves in the present activity. Hence the meditation, the mindfulness space has grown so much, where we are trying to get hold of that. How strong is the connection between the prefrontal cortex and so for people who have difficulty with inhibition control, when they directly blur out anything that they are thinking of without even considering what it will do to the other person, that is where we see the communication between the prefrontal cortex and the thalamus is very weak, the limbic system. So that was the stress part. Now obviously this will have an effect on your mood. Similarly, your performance will also have an effect on your mood. Similarly, your sleep, how well you're rested, will also have an effect. So again, mood, I don't think it is a parameter that you can capture. It is a higher level function which is contributed by many things. Try to figure out which of these stems that you want to work on. So if you want to work on your stress response, if you want to work on your for example, focus, attention, as you were mentioning, if you want to work on your vigilance or resilience to stress. For example, if something is happening, as soon as that stimuli is gone, can I bring myself back to where I was? Or am I getting stuck over there? So that's why these brain games and Sudoku, puzzles, all these things are very good, because what all you're doing is trying to train your brain. Hence, it becomes easier. So neurofeedback is the same thing. All we are trying to do is that we are trying to train different muscles, different networks. Once we are happy with that, something else is which will take our attention. We can focus on that and we can keep on growing and improving.
Okay. So I don't think so we have any more questions. Do we have questions from viewers? No?
No, all's good.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you to all the viewers for being on the episode so long. I think we took half an hour extra
Then we anticipated.
So thank you so much.